Welcome back to 2K Away. And whoever has my voodoo doll, please just throw it away.
We rhymed. I guess it's not a rhyme if it's the same word.
I'm done. Alright, well, welcome back to 2K Away.
It's been a minute.
First of all, I just want to give a huge apology. The bicentennial was kind of, time got away from me a little bit the first week. And then this past week, I've been not feeling well. I still feel not well, but I did not want to make this any later than it did. Also, couple things of business. We are officially in our new setup now.
And this is so much better.
A table and chairs.
We're not on the floor.
My back already isn't breaking.
My
knees
really
are
nice. Thanking our parents. Thank you again.
Yes, absolutely. And the bicentennial on what day was that?
The 5th.
The 5th? I don't know my days. It was a lot of fun, but
it was hot.
It was hot, and I think we've both agreed on the fact that we don't want to do anything outside again
in the summer.
It's hot.
It was warm.
It was, and we both got sunburnt because we're both so pale.
Even though I was in the shade the entire time.
Yeah, but we're the kind of people that we get sunburnt from reflections.
I had a chair umbrella.
Under our tarp.
Under our tent. I was in the shade the whole time. And I burnt. Yeah. And I was worthless the next day.
Yeah. But thank you to everybody. Now, I will say that the bicentennial was not completely our crowd. Because there was some older people there. And
we got some looks.
Yeah, we got some strange looks, but
it could have been our quote-unquote blood-spattered tablecloth that we put some
that was probably a little bit of it, but I was fine with it.
It was really cool.
But yeah, we appreciate everybody that came up and spoke with us. Unfortunately,
we met some cool people.
Yeah, unfortunately we couldn't go live because the signal was real shoddy, but it was fun. They had some great food.
Yeah.
It was always a plus, but
lemon shake-ups, let's be real.
Ugh. But I just wanted to get that out. I don't think there's any other business that we have
other
to take care
than
of.
We have shirts now available.
Yeah.
We have stickers still.
Paige, show everyone your shirt.
I have my shirt on. Looking. Sorry to those that are just listening, but just know that I have our shirt on.
Yes, and I mean we have pictures of them on our Facebook from when we went live, and we had no idea what we were doing.
But it was fun.
Yeah, so
if you want any, let us know.
Absolutely. So let's head into this week. It's going to be another long one, so just buckle in. So to give a quick recap, this is going to be the Wineville Chicken Coop Murders Part 2. And
finally.
I told, yeah, I'm so sorry. Again, I told everybody this is going to be done in 2 parts, and I'm keeping that promise because I don't want to
stretch this out any longer.
I don't. I'm so over Stewart Northcott.
Well, and
I've read too many fucking quotes by him, and I think I've gone crazy.
And any new weird part in the book you were like, holy crap, this is unreal. Oh my gosh, this is so wow.
Yeah, every time I would some of the stuff I was like, oh, I'm gonna keep this close to my chest, and then she's gonna find out when I tell her. But sometimes I was like, I have to tell you what I just read. But just a quick recap of part 1. So I introduced Stewart Northcott. I introduced his mother, Louise Northcott. How Stewart kidnapped his nephew Sanford from Canada, kept him on the ranch for 2 years, and just absolutely exposed him to who knows how many horrors. We have 4 victims. We have the quote unquote headless Mexican, our first victim. We have Walter Collins, and then we also have Lewis and Nelson Winslow. So we're going to continue. I believe we left off last week.
2 weeks ago. Last time.
I was not kidding when I said that I still don't feel good. Okay. So the Winslow boys were killed in May, and we're going to fast forward to the end of June 1928. And this episode, it's going to get a little crazy. And some of this stuff, when I was reading the book, again, Nothing is Strange with You, sometimes it got really confusing. So the confusing parts, because it's a lot of information.
Yeah.
So much. So I'm going to try and do my best to summarize it, but still give you the points that really matter in the story, because, oh buddy. So again, fast forwarding to June of 1928. Jacob Dahl had fallen on hard times. He had been ill. He had a wife and 4 sons to support, so he needed help. So he went to the local Salvation Army. His boys' ages were 8, 12, 14, and 15.
Okay.
So when Jacob got to the local Salvation Army, he waited outside the office. There was a man inside talking to the woman in charge, and he was asking her questions. And in response to one of those questions, the woman was reading off some names on a list, and she said Dahl, which is Jacob's name, and made Jacob's ears perk up. So the man chose Dahl. The woman gave him Jacob's address and told him about the 4 boys and their ages. And the man was very pleased with himself, took Jacob's information, and walked out the office. Well,
and Jacob was there, right?
Yeah, but he didn't know who he was.
Right, but he was hearing all of this happening.
That man was Stewart, just in case you were wondering.
Oh, no.
Stewart left, again, looking very pleased. The woman came out and was like, oh, yeah, that man, he was looking for someone for work on his farm. So she had her secretary take Jacob back home to where he came from. I know. So Jacob goes home, some time goes by, and then Stewart shows up at the Dahl home. Only Jacob was there at the time, so his wife and his children were not there.
Thank goodness.
But Stewart introduced himself as a Mr. Craig. So he made up this very drawn-out story about how he worked for someone, they were doing charity work, and he finally gets to the fucking point and says that he has a ranch, he'd pay him $150 a month, and there's a nice house that he could move his entire family onto and stay at the ranch and work at the ranch.
Okay, so he's getting very bold if he's suggesting to this man to move their whole family onto the ranch.
Do you remember the last thing that I said the last episode of how his dream was to have an entire family? This is that plan. So Stewart gave him some other details about it, and Jacob accepted.
Oh, no.
So Mr. Craig came back within a couple days to inquire about the Dahl boys. During the rest of the week, he showed up a few more times, unannounced. And on one of the occasions, he got to meet the 2 older boys. And then he told Jacob that he would give him more money per month after he met the 2 oldest boys.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, because unfortunately...
he met the boys, so he's like, oh, I really got to sweeten this pot to get this family out on my farm.
Because they were right up his alley, unfortunately.
They were his, the ages that he really liked.
Correct.
And I hate the fact that I just said that.
That man's disgusting.
Absolutely. So, Saturday, June 30th, Mr. Craig, Stewart, returned with a woman that he said whose name was Mrs. Mayo. First of all.
Nays?
Yeah, like Mayo.
Okay.
Which is a stupid name. That he, I don't know why they couldn't think of another one, but it was fucking Louise.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Mr. Craig and Ms. Mayo. Oh shit,
Watch
my bad. But they did tell a story about
stupid.
how, like, I don't know if she like worked for him or some shit, but they made it known that they were of some relation, I believe. And I think they told the lie that he was like her nephew or something. I don't know. Just a web of lies.
Right.
You know,
Because that's all they can do.
so they ended up going for a drive, and I believe the end goal was to go and visit the ranch. So Stewart and Mr. Dahl sat up front, and Mrs. Dahl and Louise sat in the back. Stewart asked at one point how Louise was feeling. I just, like, when I do little quotes and stuff, I just want to, like, really
Nail in the
show
fact that they're
these people
fucking
are
creeps.
awful. Yeah. So Stewart asked how Louise was feeling, and Ms. Dahl was like, "Oh, what's wrong?" And Louise was like, "Oh, I have a weak back," or some bullshit like that. And Ms. Dahl said, "Oh, I'm lucky. I have a strong back." And Louise tapped, because she was sitting directly behind Stewart. Louise tapped Stewart on the shoulder, and she's like, "Oh, did you hear that, Mr. Craig? Did you hear that? Mrs. Dahl says she has a very strong back." Really weird. So on the drive there, Mrs. Mayo,
I can't with that.
in the dumb,
That's
like,
seriously.
you couldn't think of any other fucking name.
They were like, "Oh yeah," they're like standing in their kitchen. They're like, "Oh yeah, this is Mrs.
Mustard.
Mayo." Ketchup.
I know, it's so awful. It's so stupid. I don't know. I don't know, man. So on the way there, Ms. Mayo says that she has a 14-year-old boy back at the ranch. That's her son.
Yeah,
And,
okay.
Yeah, so they drove out to the ranch, and it was dark by that time. Louise walked into the kitchen, and she literally goes, "Oh, son! Oh, son! Oh, come here, son! Come here!"
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, like making quite a scene. So Louise started making dinner while everyone else was in the living room. So Mrs. Dahl, or her name's actually Ella, said that Sanford looked at her strangely, and when she like kind of like motioned like, "Oh, hey, come sit with me, like come sit and talk to me," he kind of like looked away, like he was like a little scared or embarrassed.
Oh, that poor kid.
Oh, yeah. So when Sanford came in the house, Stewart spoke to him like pretty harshly, and the dolls noticed that. They were like, "Oh, that was really rough." So Sanford knew what Stewart was planning. So he was just, unfortunately, he just had to be there. So Stewart was going to kill them so he could get their children. That was the plan, was he was going to kill them that night and go get the kids.
Wow.
So he told Sanford he would bring them to the ranch. They would separate them, kill Jacob first, then Ella.
Right, because obviously, you know, you'd have to take care of the man first,
Right.
because then... Oh.
Yep.
Yeah, so he's not a threat when he sees him kill his wife.
Yeah, exactly.
I hate him.
Yep. So Stewart told Sanford before he left to go pick them up to get a grave ready.
Oh.
So Sanford obediently dug a grave in one of the hen houses. So when they got there, Stewart inspected the grave and was mad because he didn't think it was deep enough for both of them. And he dug some more. So Louise and the dolls went in the kitchen. You know, they said with Sanford a little bit. Sanford and Stewart went outside. Stewart inspected the grave. He's like, "This isn't deep enough." So he himself dug a little bit more into the ground. And he brought the axes out into the hen house. So Stewart had a .38 pistol on his hand, or on his person, and he made Sanford go inside and get the .22 rifle. And he made the excuse like, "Oh, there's some rabbits outside. Ha ha."
Oh, jeez.
So Sanford stood outside and waited. Stewart told the dolls while they were eating dinner that he had to keep popping outside because there was people outside in the hen house fixing the pump. And he had to deal with the grave. Yeah, he said there's people working outside in the dark.
Oh my
Working on this pump.
gosh,
Yeah.
what an idiot.
So then he said that, like, he kept popping in and out while because I'm going to tell, they did serve dinner, but he kept popping in and out of the house to be like, oh, gotta go look at, Mr. So-and-so working on the hen house. Oh, just awful. So Louise finished cooking. Ella wanted to help, so Louise handed her a dish of sliced peaches, and she apparently noticed a couple of, capsules on the top of the peaches.
Oh my gosh!
Ella said something like, oh, what is this? And I don't even remember what Louise's response to that was, but it was something like, oh, that's nothing, kind of, very dismissive of it. And supposedly Ms. Dahl, Ella, said that they looked like quinine tablets, which is apparently a malaria medication.
Oh.
I don't know, man.
Never had malaria, so.
I've never either. So the 4 adults sat down to eat, because remember, Stewart had Sanford go outside.
Right.
Stewart didn't eat anything. Even though he was the one that suggested dinner when they got to the ranch. They're like, oh, let's have dinner.
But also, the wife saw capsules in the peaches, and they still continue to sit down with them? No, don't do that. Yeah. No.
So I honestly, I don't know what the capsules ended up actually being, because I didn't find that anywhere else. It's just like, oh, I found something that looked like capsules on the peaches.
My goodness.
Yeah.
These are some trusting people.
Yeah. So Ella said that she looked up from eating at one point and she saw Stewart watching her. And
like a fucking creep.
And when their eyes met, he pretended like he was eating, and he would do the same thing to Jacob. He would look at Jacob, and then if someone looked up, he would pretend to eat. Just real creepy. I didn't about the tablets, I didn't look to see anywhere to see if the dolls felt not well after this supposed dinner or whatever. So I tried to look for it, but I really didn't see much else. So I don't know if it was just I put some aspirin in the peaches. I don't know. Again, Stewart had said something about there was a guy outside working on the pump, and he came into the house at one point and was like, oh, Mr. Whoever, made up a name, wanted to meet Mr. Dahl.
Mr. Mustard.
Probably.
Colonel Mustard.
So he had initially said that, oh, we're going to go outside eventually and meet Mr. Mustard working on the pump, because he wanted to meet Mr.
With the
Dahl.
Candlestick?
Yeah, he was like, oh, he wants to meet Mr. Dahl. He's a really peculiar guy, and he wants to meet you, Mr. Dahl, which... Oh, the whole night, the dolls were definitely this is weird.
Something's off.
Yeah, this
obviously.
is a very strange night.
Yeah.
So, but Stewart started second guessing himself. So then he was like, "Oh, Mr.
Because he's an idiot."
Yeah. So Mr. So and So doesn't need to see you anymore. He was scared that he couldn't get away with killing them both. He was afraid something would go wrong, so he chickened out. I didn't really mean chickened out.
I was getting ready to figure out how to tell you that's not a good phrase.
It's not. So he decided not to. There we go. So Stewart, the dolls, and Sanford this time got in the car so Stewart could drive them back home. But he didn't even drive them to their home. He dropped them off somewhere not even close to their home, and he made the excuse that was oh, I'm tired and I have to get up early, and then just left them somewhere. He just
and it abandoned them at some random ditch. Basically these two grown adults.
Yeah. So I was like, what? Are you kidding me? And it was past the point of public transportation was no longer running at that time of night.
Right.
So they had to basically just
walk
back to their house. I was like, are you fucking kidding me?
Oh my gosh.
So Stewart and Sanford, since they were already in town Los Angeles, they spent the night at George and Louise's house. And
was Louise
no, she stayed at the ranch.
That was going to be my question. Is she still at the ranch?
Yeah, she was at the ranch.
Oh my gosh.
They went back in the morning and filled the grave back up. So Louise and Stewart called the dolls a couple days later and told them again, both of them made this call. It started with Louise, and then Stewart interjected in the middle of the phone call. They called the dolls and they made up some like batshit story and basically was like, I'm sorry, but we can't hire you for this job anymore or whatever.
And I bet the dolls were like, cool, we weren't going to take it anyway.
Well, the thing is, it sounded like such a good job, and Jacob Dahl was a little desperate at the time that he was like, damn it, I missed out on this possibly really great opportunity. 20s. Exactly.
So
Ella Dahl was the one that answered this phone call, and she was like, oh, well, would you keep us in mind at least if a job like pops up in the future?
Oh, that hurts me.
And Stewart replied back to her, I certainly will. I am very much interested in you and your boys.
Oh, that disgusting pig.
Yep. So he did want to try to get the family back on the ranch at a later date. So he was still going to try. But I believe both of the dolls, Ella and Jacob, was part of the witnesses that were called at the trial. And Ella did say at one point that she swears that Ms. Mayo called Mr. Craig Stewart at one point. So I'm like, wow.
Oh my gosh. Because they're idiots and they can't even keep up with their own fucking lies.
No, they can't. They truly can't. Okay, so fast forward next month to July of 1928. Mm-hmm. So Sanford's family was not buying the weird letters from him.
Right.
Because they were all basically, they were in Sanford's handwriting, but they were dictated by
it wasn't
Stewart.
Sanford.
Right. So by this time, Winifred and her husband John, my handwriting is atrocious. They were separated. At this point, they hadn't seen Sanford for 2 years.
Oh my gosh.
Which, I'm sorry, but as a mother, I would have not allowed.
Well, at some point, because at the beginning of that, they said, Stewart's like, oh, we're going to go on holiday to a different part of Canada.
And then suddenly it's
all
been
of a sudden,
2 years.
A month goes by even, and he hasn't returned him, and then a year goes by.
Yeah, because
I can't even imagine.
Is, he said at first, Stewart told them that, we're going to go on a vacation. Mm-hmm. And then through the letters that he would make Sanford send, he did eventually tell them, I'm going to live on Uncle's chicken ranch, and I'm going to work here, and I'm going to go to school in the States. Mm-hmm. And, I'm going to school, and my goodness, Mama, I'm having such a great time. That sort of shit. They were not convinced by the letters. They were almost too upbeat.
Yeah.
Because like I said, Mama, I'm paraphrasing, obviously. But they were just like, this seems weird. So 19-year-old Jessie Clark, which is Sanford's older sister, she saved up some money and went to California with the, mission to check to see if Sanford was okay.
Well, good for her.
But obviously she wasn't expecting this level of shit.
No.
So she was just she just wanted to go to make sure that Sanford was actually going to school.
Right.
And poor Jessie got a lot more than she was expecting.
My gosh.
So she left around the 1st of July and she arrived on the 26th. So Stewart got a telegram of her arrival a couple days before she got there. But when she arrived, there was no one there waiting for her. Mm-hmm. Because Stewart was not pleased that she was there.
Yeah.
So she called Louise while she was at work, and Louise told her that Stewart would come and get her. So she had to stay overnight in a hotel because he didn't even come get her until the next day.
Right.
So the next morning, Stewart gets there and he literally says, "Oh, it's you. I thought it was your mother," which is like, he knew full and well that it was Jessie. Well, but yeah, he's just a dickhead. Because, he didn't want her there.
Right.
But also, she was going to spoil all his plans, Mm-hmm. So Jessie said when she got to the farm, she saw Sanford and he was working outside that's what he did.
Right.
He had dirty overalls on and he looked she said, like, really peckish, like he had lost weight. He was kind of sickly.
You know, not being taken care of.
Yeah, and she said that his hands clearly showed that he did all the work.
Yeah.
She said even though he seemed happy to see her, he was very quiet and seemed like kind of afraid to really do anything.
Because he's broken now.
Yeah.
Stewart fucking broke him.
And he told her, like, oh yeah, I'm doing fine in school. So the next day, so Jessie wrote to her mother, which Sanford told her to make sure she posted and sent it herself, because if Stewart gets a hold of it, it won't get mailed, is what he told Jessie. So Stewart would never let them be together alone to talk. Like, every time that they were together, he would, like, kind of break them up.
Yeah.
So Jessie was having a hard time getting anything out of Sanford. So the next day, Jessie was laying awake until she knew Stewart was asleep. So she actually crawled into bed with Sanford, put her hand over his mouth, and woke him up. And was like, it's really heartbreaking. But they put the covers over their heads, and Jessie began, like, to ask, like, questions.
Yeah.
And Sanford told her about the beatings, the sexual abuse, how afraid he was, and the fact that he killed a couple of boys.
Oh, no.
And he did give her some details. He did actually...
Because what is he, like 14 or 16 at this point in time?
In 28, he would be... I don't remember his birthday off the top of my head, but like 14 or 15.
Okay, that's what I was thinking.
Because he was like 13 when Stewart kidnapped him.
Okay.
So he actually did name drop Walter Collins during this conversation. And I think he actually did possibly name the Winslow boys. But I don't think he named like their first names. He was just like, I think their last name was Winslow.
Right.
Kind of thing. So Jessie stayed at the ranch for possibly a week. And Sanford would tell her a little bit more every time that they really got a chance.
Right.
She did manage to see a small amount of the physical abuse that Sanford dealt with. And Stewart also made a point to show Jessie that he kept a gun and a flashlight by his bed just in case.
Wow.
And he even showed her 2 bullet holes in the wall. It was like,
wow.
oh, this is from like an intruder. Oh, like...
Wow.
Really asserting himself, because this is what Stewart does. He is a bully and uses fear to be the head of the family.
Right.
That's what he does. He even told her that there's a pit where they kept their dead in the garage.
Wow.
Yeah. And I don't know if it was just like he was just trying. I think he was just truly trying to scare her. I don't think he was trying to confess anything to her. I think he was like, I'm going to cry. I'm going to literally pull out all the stops to get her off my ranch and back to Canada.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, because she's messing up his perfect little world.
Yes. And he even told her about Stephen Black, who I mentioned in the first episode. He was a young man who was the son of a mechanic that Stewart would like take his stuff to, and that he would, try to molest this young man. He told her that, Sanford was getting to be a big, rough man, and that he was going to have to, get Stevie to be his new darling.
What?
He said this to Jessie.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, and honestly, just...
I would, you know what, if that was me, I would literally just, in the middle of the night, when that fucker went to sleep, grabbed my brother and just fucking took off. I can't even imagine.
I know. So, at the end of the week, Stewart sent her to stay with her grandparents. And I think all in all, she stayed there for about 2 weeks. Now, this is when shit really started going down. So it was around like August 2nd, I think. I'm not really quite sure on the time, but it was like July into August that she was in California. So Sanford, Stewart, and Jessie went into town to deliver Jessie to her grandparents.
Yeah.
And I'm going to summarize this as best as I can because it gets, wow, real dramatic, real quick, and there's a lot.
Well, I can only imagine with these fucking people.
Right. So, while there, Jessie helped Sanford run away.
Oh, good.
It doesn't work, though.
Oh,
Just to let you know. There's a lot that happens. So, Jessie tried to send Sanford off to a friend's house that she knew in California to hide him there until she could get to him safely to take him back to Canada with George's help, Stewart's father.
Oh.
He helped her. Stewart, when he figured out that they were gone, he went apeshit, of course. Sanford was able to stay hidden for a little while because of George and Jessie's effort.
Mm-hmm.
And they did end up moving him to a different house of a trusted friend. During the time that Sanford was initially missing, Louise and Stewart went back to the ranch. And when Jessie asked George, they were like all hush-hush about it.
Right.
And when Jessie asked George what they were doing, he said to get rid of their evidence. And then he said, they wanted me to go, but I told them that they could do their own dirty work. Yeah.
I mean, good on you, George, but you've just sat back and watched this and this entire thing go on.
Don't feel too good for him right now.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like, good, finally. However, you've watched this entire fucking time.
Yeah.
And have done nothing.
Yeah. So they came back early in the next morning at like 2 a.m. looking all like dirty and disheveled. You know, because
they finally had to do their own thing.
Because they were digging up stuff.
Right.
So that morning, Jessie woke up to an argument between Stewart and George. Stewart accused George of like not helping him. We wouldn't be in this mess if you had just cooperated. You double-crosser. Supposedly he like grabbed George's neck and was being very violent towards him.
Actually, you should be thanking your father for not doing anything.
Yeah. Stewart ran outside supposedly to get his gun from his car. Whatever. So George went into Jessie's room. There's supposedly a .22 gun in this room that was like in a briefcase or something. I'll get to that later.
Okay.
So he went in Jessie's room to get a gun, and
George did or Stewart did?
George did.
Okay.
Because Stewart went out supposedly to get a gun from his car.
Gotcha.
So George went in the room. Jessie's like, what the fuck's happening?
Right.
And George is like, get up, get dressed, and just leave the house. So he was in the room. Stewart came back in. Confrontations. Whatever. And she left the house, but Stewart ended up chasing her down. They got back to the house. So despite Sanford trying so hard to escape, I don't know who it was that eventually told Stewart where he was, but Stewart ended up going to get him.
Oh my gosh.
And took him back to the ranch. So Stewart told Sanford after the first time that he initially ran away that he had moved the bodies, so if Sanford went running to the police, they would have no evidence to back up his claims.
Yeah.
The next week, fast forward however many days, Stewart was supposedly going to San Diego, and Louise was supposed to work. So Jessie and George made plans to go to the ranch and take Sanford a second time.
I don't know why Stewart would want to leave and just leave Sanford if he's so worried about that. You know what I mean? That's weird to me.
No, I'm pretty sure that was planned by Stewart and Louise.
Oh.
I'll get to
okay.
it. So they went to the ranch around like 11:30 that day, and Louise was there waiting for them.
Oh.
So she supposedly had to work, but she didn't. She wasn't at work.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So it was a plan to catch them, trying to
for sure.
get Sanford
Stewart
out there.
would not have.
That's why I was like,
Yeah.
That seems weird to me.
Stewart would not have left town. There would have been no way.
Not without him, at least.
No. So they all went into the house, and then Stewart showed up, got in Jessie's face, and was like, "What do you know? What has Sanford been telling you?" Just real shitty stuff. So Jessie told Stewart that she wanted to bring Sanford back to Canada. Mm-hmm. There were some more words had, and Stewart punched Jessie in the eye, and it knocked her down.
Oh.
So they laid her down the bed. They brought her ice packs, and Stewart explained why Sanford couldn't go back home. And basically his long story was that, I shot a minor back
As
to
in
the
coal miner, not like a child miner.
Yeah, back to the...
Okay.
Recalling stuff from the first episode.
Right.
So if you haven't heard the first episode, please go back and listen to it because you're going to be really lost. He was like, I shot a minor, I killed a kid, Sanford involved somehow, but never really explained why or how Sanford was involved. It was ridiculous. And one of the things that he said was what could a man do? He had to get rid of the evidence. I don't know who he was talking about was. I don't know if he was talking about himself or Sanford. I don't know. But that's the story that he told Jessie as like, this is why Sanford can't go back to Canada, because he saw me kill a man and kill a child. I don't know. Because none of what he fucking says makes any sense. So Stewart made Jessie stop trying to take Sanford, and that she would write her mother to let her know that Sanford was doing fine. This is the promise that she made to Stewart. So later that night, George and Louise drove her back to their home. Now, there was a third attempt made by Jessie and George, but I won't even go into that because it's also very confusing. But Stewart did catch them. Jessie left already for Canada, and then George was supposed to take Sanford somewhere, but Stewart confronted them and then took Sanford back to the ranch. Jessie returned to Vancouver on August 21st. And as soon as she went back to Canada, Stewart began selling off his things. Because
he knew that she was going to tell her parents.
The end was near.
Yeah.
So within about 10 days, Stewart went to a man to sell off most of his things. Like, there was like a whole process. Told this dude a bunch of crazy shit, you know. In the meantime, Jessie went to the American consul in Vancouver and made an affidavit where she stated that Stewart had smuggled Sanford into the U.S. illegally, and that his life was in danger, and that he was abusive towards Sanford, and that he committed some murders. This was all in the affidavit that Jessie made. August 30th in 1928, the LAPD received a telegram from the Canadian departments that Jessie made the affidavit in, requesting them to locate a Mr. Gordon Stewart Northcott, who had smuggled in a Mr. Sanford Clark illegally across the border. So where Stewart was supposed to be living, like through records, was supposed to be with George and Louise.
Right.
So they went to their house first. And Louise was like, oh no, he lives on a ranch in this place. And then they went back to the station and made a report. And then the next morning, they decided to drive out there. So August 31st, the next day, Stewart and Sanford drove to the service station that Stephen Black's father owned and picked up like a Studebaker that someone was working on. It was like either George's or Stewart's. It doesn't matter. And they were going to get the rest of the furniture and farm equipment that day loaded up. So Stephen tagged along to the ranch that day, which I'm like, what are you doing, boy?
Oh my gosh.
So when they got to the ranch, they started loading furniture, and United States Immigration Service Inspector Judson F. Shaw and his colleague Inspector Scalorn, I don't believe I even got his first name.
What a name.
Yeah. Shaw and Scalorn. Let me double check and make sure that that's his actual name. And Scalorn, yep. Scalorn. I was making sure that my handwriting was not deceiving me. So they set out for the ranch to bring Stewart and Sanford into custody to question them about the illegal smuggling of an immigrant.
Right.
So as Sanford was looking for a runaway rooster, because there was still a few like chickens on the ranch. Sanford and Stewart.
Let that bastard run away. Roosters are mean.
Right?
Just let him go.
Yeah.
Just chalk it up as a loss.
So while he was looking for it, Sanford saw the inspector's vehicle coming down the road, and they could see that they were uniformed. And Stewart saw them as well. Mm-hmm. So when Stewart noticed that they were in uniform, he told Sanford that he was leaving and to tell them that he's in LA somewhere. And with that, he ducked behind the hen house and then started booking it through the fields.
Wow.
So literally took off.
That piece of shit.
Yeah. So Shaw and Scowlorn got to the ranch. It was about like between like 11 and 11:30 that morning. They separated the boys. Shaw questioned Sanford. Sanford did initially tell them that Stewart was in LA. He was initially lying to them because he was scared.
Well, yeah.
You know.
Again, Stewart broke him.
Yeah.
So of course he's going to lie for him.
Exactly. But eventually, after the inspectors were there for like a little over 2 hours, he did confess. Like, Stewart took off. Mm-hmm. Blah, blah, blah. So he didn't really divulge a whole lot there at the farm.
Right.
But he was like, Stewart did take off. And yes, I'm here illegally. So they searched about a mile radius with no results. He had already, with the 2 hours, he did get a good start. Mm-hmm. Stephen drove back to the garage, and Sanford was taken to the juvenile hall in Los Angeles, and the officers of the LAPD were asked to cover areas where Stewart was known to frequent. Now, Stewart's excursion before officially going, because he does flee to Canada eventually, but his movements while he's officially on the run are so fucking weird.
Well, and consider the source.
And again, I'm going to summarize as best as I can because it honestly confused the shit out of me as I was reading. Like, I don't even know where I am anymore. So he first went to an office of a Walter Clayson, who was an attorney in Corona. So that was like one of
California?
Yes.
Okay.
So that was one of his first stops. Stewart gave him a wild story and offered him $25 to go to the ranch and see what the officers wanted. Like, hey, if I give you $25, will you go to my ranch and investigate and ask what these officers want? And the lawyer was like, I'm not in the business of investigating, so no. I was like, but he was like, if there's any legal matters, I'll help you with that. But I'm not going to go to your ranch and do this for you. He was like, no. So this meeting apparently lasted about like 10 minutes. And Clayson said that Stewart was visibly nervous and he wouldn't sit down and he like was pacing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And he actually, another thing, I didn't even write it down, but another thing he was like, that he noted was he was not wearing any hat, which of course back then was very, how dare you?
You're not wearing a hat?
Yeah, he was.
Scoff.
Yeah. You bum. Yeah, that's.
And nowadays it's like, oh, he was wearing a weird, like, what is it, a fedora?
He was wearing a bowler hat? Like, why? I know. Yeah, it was just funny.
A sign of the times.
He was nervous and he wasn't wearing a hat. So around 2:30, Stewart called for a taxi to pick him up in Ontario. This is in California. There's an Ontario, California. So he made this taxi driver go. I'm going to summarize this because he made this taxi driver drive. Like, he first had him follow him in his car for hours, and then eventually got in the taxi and was like, oh, drive here, all over Los Angeles and outside Los Angeles County.
Okay.
For hours. He had this taxi driver drive all around. And I believe, like, at the end, finally, when he parted ways with this taxi driver, he was like, I think the taxi fare was like $9.
Oh, if like, only, man.
Buddy. So
$9.
So then later, I believe it was the same day, he ended up at the office of a judge around like 7 or 7:30, and I'm like, Judge, what are you doing still in your office at like almost 8 o'clock at night? But whatever.
Depends on what they're working on.
Yeah, so told this judge this crazy story that, oh, I'm getting divorced and my wife is blah blah blah. I don't even know.
You're on the run and you go to a fucking judge?
I'm telling you, man, most of the shit that he says and does makes literally no sense.
Oh my god.
So he made up a crazy story for this judge. The judge gives him a ride to George and Louise's home. Stewart stayed in the car while the judge, I don't even remember his name off the top of my head because it really doesn't matter, but he was asking this judge for legal advice, and the judge recommended him to an R.D. Wickham, the name of a lawyer. It was like, oh, I can refer you to this gentleman. So he ended up giving him a ride back to Louise and George's house. The judge went up and knocked on the door while Stewart stayed in the car. Louise answered the door. There were some words between her and the judge. She went to the car and spoke with Stewart a little bit. And basically, Stewart wanted to pick up a briefcase at George and Louise's home.
I can't.
Dude,
other than just stare at you blankly with my eyebrows all weird.
Yeah.
Because I don't even...
Dude, it gets weirder.
I can't.
So he met with this R.D. Wickham lawyer the next day, and supposedly the Northcotts claim, anyway, that this lawyer told them that if you flee to Canada, that the minute that you cross the border, you'd be safe from any charges, or you wouldn't be able to get arrested.
Okay.
So, and again, Wickham denied this later under oath. He was like, I never said that, but okay. So George ended up driving Stewart to the bus station in San Fernando, and from there he fled to Canada. Stewart, one of the things that he said to George of like the preface of, this is why I need you to drive me to the bus station. He told George, he was like, Sanford is my companion. I want to be with him, and I'm going to be in Canada when he's deported, so I'll be like the first thing that he sees. Just this whole bullshit thing. Yes. But George knew what was going on, but he was like, okay. And still took him to the bus station. Like I'm saying, like sometimes you want to root for George, but you don't.
No.
Don't ever root for George ever, because he's equally as awful as the rest of his fucking family.
This is ridiculous.
Yes. So around the time that those were Stewart movements. So around the time that Stewart started like selling off his furniture, this was again in August, beginning of September, Louise quit her job at the hospital. Again, the end was nigh.
Right.
So she waited a couple days for her. I think it was like her employees had to like give her like her last bit of money that they owed her, basically. And then she left for Canada. And she told George that she would write to him under the pseudonym of Mrs. F.W. Hudson.
Not Mayo?
Not Mayo, surprisingly. I was sad to hear that they weren't very attached to Mayo. So Stewart bought her a round trip ticket. Some people think that they possibly did meet up somewhere before they actually made the journey in like across the border. Mm-hmm. They get into Canada. Louise rented a room somewhere. Stewart claimed that he was like staying with family, or he may have rented a room. I'm not really sure. But while in Canada, a little bit, like I think around like the 8th of September, Stewart actually ran into Jessie and a friend of hers by chance, which I'm like, what are the fucking chances?
Seriously?
Yeah. So he asked her a ton of questions. It was like, are you meeting Sanford? And Jessie didn't know that Sanford had been arrested at this point. So she was like, oh, this is all news to me.
So
what?
Sanford is still in the custody of LAPD at this point in time.
Yes. He's being held at a juvenile detention center.
Right.
awaiting to get deported.
Right.
Basically. So between this confrontation between Stewart and Jessie, there was some like weird comments that Stewart had made, and one of the things, because she had a friend of hers with her, so he kind of was making things like real cryptic, what he was like saying to her, and one of the things that he said to her was that he was getting off scot-free, and that Sanford and Louise would take the fall. He was like, there's no evidence. Just being a slimy fuck. Now, Winifred, Jessie and Sanford's mother,
right,
Stewart's sister, did help Stewart and Louise into their journey into Canada and to keep moving from authorities. Winifred did aid them with that. So I'm grouping Winifred in the same shitty category as the rest of the North. Yeah, like maybe you weren't involved directly, but you were still helping your garbage family with all this.
The one who abducted your son that you haven't seen in 2 years?
Yep.
Are you shitting
and
me?
Threatened your daughter? Yeah. So supposedly she had, according to Stewart anyway, supposedly she bought like a runaway car for them. And Winnie, because I wrote down that he called her Winnie, but he said that supposedly Winifred was going to help fight the charges against him and all sorts of shit. So back in LA, Sanford spent 2 days in the juvenile home before he began to tell his story to an LA officer. So September 14th, LAPD Detective Lieutenant Chester A. Lloyd from The Changeling. I'm telling you this because this is going to give you like an idea of like, oh.
Yeah.
So he had been involved since the beginning, since the immigration stuff.
Right.
And then Sanford started, hey, I have a really big old bombshell to give you.
Right.
And then he started becoming a little bit more in the involved. So he went with like a bunch of other officers, one of them being Captain Jones, by the way.
Oh, fuck him. Fuck Captain Jones.
Please don't scream into the mic, sir.
Fuck Captain Jones.
Thank you. So they all went to this juvenile home to question Sanford and to get his full testimony and whatnot. So, and they were responding to the affidavit made by Jessie.
Right.
So they had the letter from Jessie, and Sanford told them the whole story, and it matched pretty much everything that Jessie had said in the letter. So already corroborating evidence.
Right.
So they brought in about 30 pictures of missing boys, and he was able to pick out Walter Collins from this whole thing, which, I mean, from an investigation standpoint, you can be like, well, his picture might have been in a paper or,
right,
you know, on a missing poster.
When you don't know anything about this kid, you could think that he probably possibly saw him on any other thing.
Right.
When you're on the other side and know what Sanford has been through, there's no way in hell Sanford has probably seen any newspaper or anything like that because he's kept on the ranch all the damn time and can't get anything or do anything.
Yep. So Lloyd and a Lieutenant Harrell and a Lieutenant Bucks took Sanford out to the ranch and started digging. So they went to the first chicken shed where Walter was supposed to have been buried.
Right.
And they started digging and noticed that the soil was loose. Like it had been
recently
dug
up
before. Yes. The loose soil kind of went about 4 feet down. And they said that the hole was about 2.5 feet wide by like 4.5 to 5 feet long. So they said that it was kind of a sandy loam soil.
What does that mean?
So I looked that because I am not a
soil guy.
I'm definitely not a soil guy. I'm not a geologist. I'm sorry. I don't mean to laugh, but
you're not a geologist.
But I'm not a geologist, yeah.
Or you don't play with dirt.
I don't. So they outlined where the soil had changed into loam And that's when they found the measurements of the hole. So loam soil is kind of like the fluffy kind of dirt that you would use to like plant stuff like in your garden.
Okay.
You know? Because then I went into a little bit of a deep dive on human composting. And what... Have I ever told you about human composting?
Oh, yeah, you told me that.
I did tell you about that. Okay,
yeah,
so
you did tell me about that.
This made me go into a different deep dive, and I was, while at work, looking at what dead bodies do to soil and all that stuff. So when a body dies, it does change the chemical makeup of that soil.
Right.
So one of what I said earlier about human composting, so one of the practices that have started, it's now become legal, I believe, in Washington State, where instead of cremating a loved one, what they will do is they will take the loved one's body, go out into a national forest. They'll put you in this like cylinder thing. Look it up. It's quite fascinating, and I don't know if I would want to do that. But it's supposed to be like a more energy saving form of cremation. So basically what it is the body gets put in a container, for lack of a better word, and it's made kind of on a rotisserie. I'm sorry to say that, but it's spun, and the container is filled with wood chips, alfalfa, and like another form of like plant or something, and the oxygen is pumped out of the container to keep from microbials growing and all like the nasty stuff that you would get from decomposition. So that doesn't grow. That kind of bacteria does not grow. So basically the end result after about a month of this is it kind of, the body is supposed to turn into kind of a fluffy soil. So essentially...
What happens to the bones? The bones don't, though, right?
I don't know.
Do they basically, once it's all done...
That was a big question of mine, and
once it's all done, they open it up
answered.
And pick out the bones? For lack of a... I mean, that's not... I mean...
I don't know, man. That was one of my many questions that I had about human composting.
And the teeth?
I don't know. I don't know if that's part of the breakdown of this.
And you're just left with bones and teeth?
But you're left, but it's supposed to, I don't know about the bones. I didn't see that part, or maybe I just wasn't looking for the right terminology when looking into human composting, but it's supposed to leave you with like this soil. So basically at the end of the process, like when you cremate a loved one, you get a little box of ashes.
Right.
And with human composting at the end of this process, however long it be, because I saw it was like a month.
I was going to say, I figured it would be longer than that even.
I thought so too, but it might depend on the size of the person too. I'm not really quite sure.
Well, there's that.
I didn't look in too much to it because first of all, it's still a very new concept, and it's only legal in one state in the U.S. so far. So maybe we'll be seeing this coming more in the next maybe decade. I'm not sure. So at the end of this process, you instead of getting a box of ashes, you get a box of
dirt.
Basically, yeah. So you can then like spread your loved ones, not ashes, and like maybe use it to plant stuff in it.
Can't wrap my head
my head.
I can't wrap my head around it.
Yeah, so
I can't.
Again, this is why I went into a little bit of a deep dive on this, because I mean not to get like too into it, but essentially like when an animal dies, its body is then, given back to the earth.
Right.
All that stuff. I mean, humans are different. They bury their dead in different ways, and cremation and blah, 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 blah. So I just looked into it of, now, when you die, the body does release some harmful chemicals.
Right.
And depending on what we put in our body, like fillings and whatnot can be kind of harmful to the environment.
Yeah.
But in a proper setting, it actually isn't that damaging to soil and can actually be like a good thing for it. So look into it if you want to dive further into it. It's a little fascinating, and it definitely like makes you think a little bit. But going back to the chicken coop murders, that's why I dove into that. I'm sorry about this like wild tangent that I just took you on, but I wanted to look into it because I wanted to know for sure, like, is this what a dead body does to soil? Does it turn it into, what does it do to the soil? I mean, depending on the chemical makeup, how does it turn? Does it make it into like a clay? Does it make it into a loam? What is loam? You know? So I was like, I don't know what the fuck loam is. And that's when it started, where I was like, oh my God. So, sorry. Going back.
The more you know.
Yeah. Look into human composting. That's all I have to say, because it's fascinating.
No, thank you.
Okay. So anyway. So they found that the soil where Sanford said the graves were was a different kind of soil than the rest of the ground. And so once they started digging, they found like towards the bottom of these graves, there basically the bottom was covered in lime. Now, the second grave was about 4.5 feet wide by 6 feet long, which is where the Winslow boys were said to have been buried. And at the bottom of that, they found what looked like blood that had been mixed with soil. So it had a specific cakey texture.
Right.
In the incubator room, Lloyd found a number of pieces of discarded clothing, and he found a small cap, and they asked Sanford about it, and he said that it looked like the one that Nelson Winslow was wearing. So after digging the holes, they called Sheriff Clemens A. Sweeters. He was the sheriff of Riverside County at the time. So he came out, and they continued the investigating until about 7:30. Then they left for the day because it had turned dark.
Right.
And they took the cap, and on their way back to Los Angeles, they stopped at the Pomona police station, where they called Mr. Winslow, and he identified it as belonging to Nelson.
No.
So during the next few months, the ranch, or murder farm, as the press dubbed it.
Oh, my.
So September 14th, when they started the investigation on the ranch, a 24-hour guard was placed on the ranch, and it remained there until after the trial.
Oh, good.
So when they started digging, the odor of decayed human flesh was very strong.
Oh, I bet.
All the dirt taken from the graves was screened twice and finally sluiced. From the bottom of the graves, where the boys' heads rested, they took big chunks of dirt and found the dirt was very saturated with human blood. They found finger, hand, and foot bones, as well as finger and toenails, human flesh, and human hair in both graves.
Oh, my goodness.
In the Winslow grave, they found a tooth. It looked like I believe it was a partial tooth. I don't think it was a full tooth, from a juvenile of around 11 or 12 years old. So they did find a piece of cloth as well, and it apparently was the same material that Nelson's shirt was. So still in the Winslow grave, the lime had human hair with follicles clinging to it, human skin and flesh crusted in the lime, and then quantities of human blood and juvenile bones as well.
Wow.
And again, these are fragments. So the lime piles just across the street from the ranch, which is one of the places that Stewart claims that Sanford says that they spread some of the dirt that they took. Because remember from the first episode when I said about the Winslow boys that they took some of the clotted dirt that had blood on it and they spread it places?
Right.
This is one of the places that they spread it. So they found the lime piles just across the street from the ranch, and they also had hair, skin, flesh, blood, and then parts of a juvenile human skull in them. So near the house, they found pieces of burned human skull, going back to the headless Mexican.
Right.
A board that had a little yacht drawn on it, sketched in crayon by the Winslow boys.
Oh my gosh, that hurts me.
And that was one of the things that Sanford actually said. He was like, I did at one point find a little board with a little boat drawn on it.
Oh my goodness.
And they were able to find it. And then they also found peaches. They also found pieces of the like the banjo ukulele thing.
Oh, that the little one had.
Yes.
That he made.
That Sanford eventually burned. Some pieces of that were found.
Oh no.
The axes used in the murders were recovered and found that part of the handle, which was the part that was enclosed by the eye of the axe.
Okay.
Like the hole.
Right.
It was soaked with human blood.
Yeah.
Of course, they made a lot of effort to clean these axes, but
It's real hard to clean all of that off.
And again, unless you're taking
not from like personal experience, I'm just saying.
I know, but I mean, still
to be able to get all of that off, it'd be real hard to do.
Yeah, I mean, you would need to take it apart.
Yeah.
Which I don't think they did. So the next day, the news hit the press, and it was official. The hunt for Stewart was on. So there was a grand jury that met to consider bringing indictments on 4 counts of first-degree murder against Stewart. September 21st, George was arrested, and he was being held as a material witness. The officers at the grand jury said that George had a most terrible fear of Stewart and knew that there were at least 2 murders, but was protecting his son. This is what the officers said at the grand jury. So at first, George denied any knowledge and then slowly began to tell them some of what he knew.
He probably didn't know everything, though. That's the other thing.
Well, no, George definitely did not know all the details, but this is kind of what he did as far as anything that Stewart is concerned, is that, like, with George, there is a theme of, like, first he denies everything, and then slowly but surely you start peeling back that onion, and then you start to see a little bit of the horribleness, but then he closes it off again, and then he'll, like, be like, oh, I don't know, and, like, that's what George does. George lies, but he doesn't blatantly lie the way Louise and Stewart do.
He doesn't lie just to lie.
Yes.
Just to keep talking
George
and
lies
keep making
to
shit
cover
up.
the horrible shit that his family does, but he continues to do whatever they want.
Yeah.
So at the grand jury, when they brought the indictments, George took the stand, Sanford took the stand, and after hours of testimony, the jurors returned indictments, 4 counts of murder and sodomy against Stewart, and then 1 count of murder for the Walter Collins murder against Louise.
Okay.
Based off of Sanford's testimony.
And that's the only indictment that they came off on Louise.
Yes.
Is the 1 count for Walter.
Yes. This is all going in Los Angeles. So going back to Canada, where Stewart and Louise are.
Right.
So Stewart was, I don't know why, he was like weaving back and forth on the borderline. Like he would be in the U.S., then he'd go like back to Canada, and then he'd like go back to the U.S., and like back to Canada.
Because he's an idiot.
Because he's stupid. I'm not trying to tell people how to get away with murder, but stupid. Whatever.
The way he's doing it is not the way.
Yeah, so basically the way that he was caught was that he went on a steamship. So I think it was some sort of ferry. I just saw steamship. And that's what I assumed that it was. And someone who worked there recognized his picture from the paper and called the police. The gentleman that like took his payment for his ticket, Stewart gave him $100 in U.S. currency. He gave him a $100 bill. And the guy was, of course, like, I mean, when someone hands you a foreign currency, you're going to remember that person.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, don't get me wrong. If it's by the border, it's not as weird, but it's still not common to get that. So the guy was kind of like, that's weird. That guy looks familiar.
Yeah.
Oh, I think I know who that is.
That's not the kind of familiar you hope to see.
Yeah. The police got to the station because he got off this ferry and then he went to a train station. And at the train station, the cops get there and they follow Stewart into the train and then they confront him that way. And that's when they arrest him. So he was taken to provincial police headquarters in Kamloops. I think that's how you pronounce that, right? Kamloops?
I don't know why you're asking me. First of all, I can't see what you're saying, what you're trying to read. And second of all, I'm not from Canada.
Sorry, Canada. He was questioned there and they asked him where Winifred was because remember, she was helping him and Louise because she hadn't been heard from as well. So they thought like she was missing. Maybe she was also murdered.
Was Louise not with him at this point in time when he was caught?
No. They were not together at this point.
Interesting.
So he was held and getting ready to face extradition back to the U.S. So Louise, after parting ways with Stewart, tried to buy a train ticket with a $50 U.S. currency bill because I think it's funny that they both got caught for being dumb. And the gentleman that was at the train station remembers a young man dropping this woman off. And the reason why he remembers her is, yes, she gave him a $50 United States bill, but then she got like pissy about it that he wouldn't take it. So then she left. She exchanged it for Canadian currency and then came back to buy her train ticket. So the gentleman who took Louise's $50 bills remembers Louise being dropped off by a young man and another younger woman.
Oh.
Which was Stewart and Winifred.
Oh.
Yes. So Louise was arrested on board a train to Calgary. So now they've both been arrested.
Good.
So there was a bunch of issues getting them back into the U.S. They made appeals. Because nothing with them is easy.
Right.
And they fought tooth and nail to stay in Canada. They were eventually deported. They were in Canada for about 2 months with extradition issues. And Louise was actually in Canada for a little bit longer than Stewart was. So once they were both in custody, Winifred finally did come forward and she made a statement and she was like, now, once they were both in custody, Winifred did finally come forward and she was like, oh, I don't know why I sided with them and abandoned my children. And
yeah, good question, Winifred.
yeah. So there was debate on jurisdiction of the headless Mexican trial. So shitload of back and forth.
Right.
At first, they decided that based on Sanford's testimony, they came to the conclusion at first that it was done in LA County because this was all in Riverside County. So they were like, okay, so the only other plausible explanation is that he was killed at George and Louise's house. So we're going to try him in Los Angeles County.
But they don't actually know where he was actually killed.
No, they were like, on Britannia Street, George and Louise's house. Well, she's involved with this too, so LA County. He was never tried in LA County. Again, lots of back and forth. He was tried in Riverside County for the quote-unquote headless Mexican man.
Who was still never identified.
Still. Now, during this time, Sheriff Sweeters was convinced that Stewart was involved in more murders. Now, there was a 13-year-old from San Diego, a Nicholas Esparza, who vanished May 28th of 1927, and his skeletal remains weren't found until September 18th of 1928, about 10 miles north of San Diego.
Okay.
But again, there's no way to prove that.
Right.
So while in custody, the police did searches of all the Northcott stuff. They searched the ranch again. Shut up. They searched the ranch again. They searched George and Louise's home, where they found a .22 rifle. Keep that in mind.
Okay.
Every other place that they were known to frequent. They even searched places where they used to live.
Oh.
Like, not even current homes. They searched a lot of stuff. So, while this was all happening, Sanford was being held at the Riverside County Hospital, and they said that he hadn't been able to sleep except for short naps during the daytime.
Oh, that poor kid.
So, Jessie came back to be a witness, and she and Sanford were able to be reunited. And the people in charge of setting up this reunion was Loyal Kelly, who...
Hopefully not Captain Jones.
No.
We know how good he is at setting up reunions.
No. It wasn't him. So it was District Attorney W. Earl Redwine, who we will be hearing a lot from, and also Loyal Kelly. I don't believe he was any kind of district attorney, but he was on the team of the state. So it was Redwine and Kelly who were the prosecution in this case. So in October, they were able to reunite Jessie and Sanford, and it was Redwine that said that she had, in quotes, she took her brother in her arms and loved and caressed him in a way that a mother would receive her own child from who she had been parted for many months.
Oh.
I know. I was like, okay, I have to keep going, otherwise I'll cry.
So Sanford is finally back in Canada now.
No.
Oh, they brought Jessie to...
Yes, they brought
California.
Jessie to California because she was also a key witness.
Gotcha.
It was November 5th when Stewart's extradition process began. Mm-hmm. And it was said that at first during the hearing, he was all like smug and smiley and just being shitty.
Right.
But once they started reading the charges and Sanford's testimony and showed Sanford's affidavit, he got pale and like his smile disappeared. And supposedly he teared up a little bit.
Oh, fuck him.
But that didn't last long. The next day, the judge ordered his extradition to California. They, because at the time they were going to try him in 2 different counties, they had to do 2 different extradition processes.
Right.
So
it's a whole process.
It is. And again,
just...
they ended up only trying him in Riverside County because that was a whole another big like red tape thing to go through. Was at first they were going to try him in LA County for the death of who they called John Doe, the headless Mexican.
Right.
And then they were going to try him for the other boys in Riverside County. But all in all, he got tried everything in Riverside. So I'm skipping over all of that.
Yeah.
So November 27th, Stewart was officially taken across the border. And during the drive, Stewart was being himself, so it was awful.
Oh, I can't imagine what those poor officers went through.
During this, he made a lot of confessions and was saying a bunch of weird shit.
Oh, I'm sure.
Stewart,
just to hear himself talk.
Stewart, yes, he loved it. Stewart made a lot of bogus confessions and then would retract them. And then he'd make confessions. Oh, I never said that. Mm-hmm. That's what Stewart did and continued to do until the moment he fucking died. I'll get to it. So Louise was extradited as well. But again, like I said, she was there for a little bit longer than Stewart because, and again, like while they were in Canada, there were even appeals to the extradition and it was like a whole mess.
Yeah.
So on the stop to spend the night on the way down to Riverside County, the men went to a diner with a piano and Stewart asked if he could play it. And again, this was on, they had to stop, spend the night, and then continue on the...
Oh, God, that would be awful.
Yes. So they gave him permission. They're like, sure, you can play the piano. So he played the piano, some things off the top of his head. He noticed some sheet music on top of it and made the remark, "It's great to be around a piano again. Let me see these pieces. I may never get a chance to play again." And he was like all in good spirits then. So one of the officers that brought him down, I don't even remember the names of any of them. It doesn't really matter. But I believe it was quoted by one of them, or maybe it was in the book, that said that Stewart made, in quotes, kaleidoscopic leaps from one subject to the other. This is the most perfect sentence to describe the way that Stewart talks. Honestly.
Yeah.
Because you'll see in later... You know what? I'll get to it. Because when you hear it, you're
you
going to...
do that all the fucking
I know.
time. You start,
I get ahead of
you know
myself.
What? I'll get to it.
I'll get ahead of myself. So they made stops, and at Seattle's Union Station, there was a huge crowd of people there to gawk at him.
Oh, I'm sure.
And anytime that he would make some sort of bogus confession or he would talk just offhandedly about the crimes, all the men would write stuff down.
Well, yeah.
Because, you had to. And it was on this trip, the one where he was being extradited back to California. It was on this trip that he made that outrageous, where he claimed that outrageous story about the way he killed the headless Mexican of you're stealing my money. Here's my gun. And the real dramatic. And this is when he made that confession.
Okay.
Now, Earl Redwine was the district attorney. He was one of the men that did extradite Stewart. So he was there when Stewart was extradited, and he brought him back down. And needless to say, he was not a fan. So they got to LA on November 30th. He did a lot of interviews in jail, which is where a lot of some of the really outlandish and probably not true things come from.
Probably, yeah. Because, again, he just likes to hear himself talk.
Exactly. Now, in the 20s, it was definitely a different time of, some reporters would do, basically anything to get people to read their stories and make, outlandish claims about somebody.
Oh, yeah.
And some people would say, oh, he acted normal, and then some reporters were oh, he acted really effeminate. But, what does that actually mean? His mannerisms, the way he talked, it was effeminate. But again, what does effeminate mean to you?
Right.
Kind of thing. And the thing is, even if he acted effeminate, it might have been an act.
Right, because he was good at that.
He was. They even had a phrenologist study his features, which I thought was fascinating. And what he said about it was actually really interesting, and I don't have any quotes from him directly. But he was pretty much the shape of his nose says this, and his jawline says this. But it was actually all really relevant. That's why I was oh shit. And I wanted to mention it. But, I mean, phrenology is obviously not
an exact science.
to put it very broadly. But it was still pretty cool to read what the phrenologist had to say. Now, December 2nd, Stewart told them that he would show them where he buried Walter Collins, the headless Mexican, and the Winslow boys.
And this was December?
In December, beginning of December. So there's a bunch of back and forth. So again, he's awaiting trial. He's already been indicted, but he's awaiting trial now. So he says, I'll show you where the bodies are. I don't even remember what kind of thing that he wanted in return.
Right.
Or if he did, I don't even remember, because it doesn't matter, because the story that I'm about to tell you is fucking bonkers. So a bunch of deputies took him out to where he claims that he buried these bodies. So on the way, they, stopped for lunch. And then they kept going, and along the way, Stewart says that he won't show them where the bodies are buried until he can be taken to the ranch to speak with George and Sanford and have them tell their part in this.
Oh my gosh.
So there was back and forth with Stewart and the deputies. So they did take him to the ranch. And someone was sent to go get George Northcott, who was still being held at that hospital as a material witness.
Right.
So while they were waiting on George, he showed them where he kept Walter Collins. And he's like, yep, this is where I kept him. But again, he does shit like this, where he'll be like, yes, I killed them. No, I never said that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they go into the farmhouse just before George and the other deputy that's bringing him are about to arrive. And Stewart asked one of the deputies to hide him because I guess he wanted to make a scene.
Because of course he did.
So this deputy allowed this to happen.
Oh my gosh.
So he stepped into a closet with Stewart.
What?
And like hid.
What?
So George comes in, he enters the farmhouse, and then Stewart and this investigator come out of this closet, which has a whole different meaning if you're really thinking about it.
What the fuck?
I'm telling you.
Is happening? What in the hell?
And this also goes to show you, Stewart wanted to make a mockery of the police. His whole thing is he wanted to make fools out of these people, and
because they're already doing it themselves.
They really were, and he certainly was enjoying it.
Yeah,
and that's basically everything that he did once in custody was a game to him up until he was sentenced. Really, so I mean, it's this whole trip in the desert is fucking wild.
I'm just gonna have to sit away from my mic because I'm going to be talking loudly.
Yep.
This is what in the hell?
So he and this investigator come out of this closet. So I know. So he's basically like, "Hello, father. Here I am." So then he's like, "Tell them your side of the story." Like, again, he just wants to intimidate George. This is his goal, was to intimidate George and get him to shut up, and so he can not get charged with it. That's basically his goal.
Hiding in the closet.
Hiding in a closet with an investigator.
I can't.
Yeah, so once he starts talking to George starts off with being like, kind of like, "Oh, but you did do something." It was very weird because at first he was like, "No, I'm sticking with what I was doing." And then the more Stewart talks with him, the more George started like kind of weirdly agreeing with him. Because again, George is scared of him. He's afraid of Stewart.
I mean, I get it because he's a scary motherfucker.
Yeah, but
Clearly.
You're surrounded by cops right now.
However, he is in custody currently.
Yeah.
Now, I know that a lot of those officers may not seem very bright if one of them hid in a closet with Stewart and jumped out in surprise.
Stop yelling.
I'm sorry.
Into the mic.
I'm trying to sit back because I'm so angry.
I know, dude.
I don't know. At this point, I don't even know. Nothing else is going to surprise me about any of this.
It will. So it did get heated, but George never really admitted to anything.
No, of course he didn't.
And to the point where Stewart actually yelled at him at one point, "I hate you, you hate me, and you know it." So I'm like,
okay.
Yeah, I'm sure Daddy will really agree with you there.
Oh my gosh.
So, hid in a closet and then came out with a deputy. "Father, here I am." Yeah, that's what I'm imagining in my head. They walk out of the farmhouse. Then Stewart insisted on being taken to the hospital where Sanford was being held.
Don't tell me they fucking took him to the hospital. They fucking took him to the hospital, didn't they?
Yeah. So, before they left for the hospital, they took Stewart out to where the Winslow boys were buried. And they even allowed Stewart to jump in the grave.
What?
And one of the men even took a pick and dug up some of the ground and told Stewart to smell the dirt, to smell the disturbed ground. But all he said was, he was like, "Well, we'll go to Sanford and he can tell us the truth," is what he told them. Because they're like, "Hey, how about you smell this? This smells like lime, doesn't it?" And he's like, "Well, we'll ask Sanford."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So first of all, you shitty fucking deputies, you're letting him tramps around the crime scene.
And you're letting him dictate everything.
Yep.
You are literally letting this fucking criminal, this nasty...
gets worse.
Oh, I don't want it to.
No, it does. So Sanford at this point was at another hospital because he actually had fallen ill or something.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean,
but he was sick. I don't know what from, but he was at another hospital. So they go to this hospital. A crowd of officers watched.
oh my gosh.
He was like weirdly like that sweet sort of scary. Talking to Sanford, like, oh, like, you know, in The Office, after Michael and Jan break up, and Jan comes back with her boob job, and is all like, "Hi, Michael, how are you doing? Oh, I thought we could get back together." Like the real, like, she's acting really sweet, but she's actually kind of terrifying. That's kind of what Stewart was. I mean, to give you a pop culture reference to really describe the scene to you, that's, I know it may sound goofy, but that's kind of what Stewart was doing to Sanford. Right. I'm genuinely not trying to make a joke out of it. I'm trying to compare it to really show you. I don't know if that helped anybody, but so Stewart was really trying, but Sanford wouldn't budge, which good for him.
Good.
At one point, he stroked Sanford's hand and said,
"They let him touch him."
Yeah. So he said to Sanford, "Remember those last 3 weeks? Now tell the truth, won't you?" So the last 3 weeks is when Sanford was trying to run away. And I can only imagine the horrible abuse that he probably went through. So that's what Stewart was like
referring to.
Remember those last 3 weeks? Now tell the truth, won't you?
Oh.
So
and those officers let him touch him.
They let this happen.
All of this happen.
They let this happen.
Unbelievable.
Yes. So Sanford never gave in.
Oh, good. That poor kid.
I know. So, of course.
So he was stronger than George.
Yes.
When he was the one that had to endure all the bullshit that he had to endure, he was stronger than George in this moment.
Yes. Yes. This poor 15-year-old boy who had went through 2 years of literal hell had more of a backbone than his adult grandfather. Papers. So, Sanford never gave in. Stewart did make a scene as he was leaving. He was like, "I curse you, Sanford," because that's what he has to do, is he has to make a scene.
Yes.
So he got out of Stewart's room, and as soon as he got out of the room, he insisted that they go to the desert because he was going to show them where the Mexican's head was buried to prove that Sanford was lying.
What the fuck is that? What? How in the hell does that prove that? How does that... What?
Again... Everything that Stewart says and does makes no sense. So, right then and there, he claimed that he killed the headless Mexican in Riverside. He's like, they said something, and he's like, well, because he wasn't killed in Los Angeles, I killed him in Riverside County.
Okay.
Yeah. So, again, he was making bogus confessions with this whole trip, and he claimed that, yes, he would plead guilty in self-defense. Because remember, the headless Mexican tried to
steal from him and try to stab him or whatever.
He even wrote it down in writing and was like, "I will give this to you in writing. I will plead guilty in self-defense because I want to prove that Sanford is lying about."
Jesus.
Yeah. Then they went to the desert to prove Sanford was lying.
Oh my gosh.
And on this trip, he admitted to killing 9 people, but only claimed that he killed 5. He made a lot of other drawn-out confessions during this drive. Of course, they had to stop for dinner. And they drove all around the desert. They did stop once, dug a little, and then it got dark. And then Stewart was like...
They needed a nighttime snack.
Yeah. So Stewart goes, "It's dark. I'm confused. I've gotten lost." And he was basically like, "Look, take me back to like this gas station way back there, miles past that we did pass a while ago. Take me back there, and then let's sit there until it's daytime again, and then I'll know exactly where we're going."
Did they fucking do that?
And I'll be sure to find it. So they didn't do that.
Okay.
But they did go back to Victorville in their drive and went to a restaurant to eat, and then they decided to all go sleep in the car to get some rest before dawn, before their before their second arm of this trek.
What?
So they got a blanket. Stewart had a headache, so they gave him an aspirin. And then he made up a bunch of other versions of how the murder events happened.
What?
So dawn comes. They sleep in the car.
Oh my gosh. I'm like,
sit back.
I don't.
So dawn comes.
None of this fucking happened. This could not have happened.
No, it happened.
I can't.
So dawn comes. And they start their journey to the gas station that Stewart was like, oh, if we go here, I'll know exactly where I'm going. So right at this, they turn off and go deeper into the desert. So they go down maybe like 25, 30 miles. And he points out some places and eventually says, oh, I can't seem to find it.
Oh my gosh. You couldn't even say that with a straight face.
I know. So they keep driving. And then he says that he's changed his mind and he won't point out anything for them because he believes that Sanford was coached into a confession.
Oh, you stupid.
So,
son of a bitch.
So the deputies are like, now stop playing around. Where's the spot?
Oh,
and
now
then,
you're saying stop playing around?
Yeah.
So
one of them, there's two names, Bright and Crushorn. I believe that's how you pronounce that. It doesn't matter because obviously they're not very bright. But, sorry. So they're like, stop playing around. Where's the spot? And I can only imagine like in 1920s, the stop playing around now. Where's the spot? That's, you know.
Uh-huh.
And then Stewart says, oh, well, we passed it this morning, but I didn't have the nerve to point it out to you.
No.
So they get to a place that Stewart claims that is where he buried them, and they stop and they get out. This continued for a little while longer, but I'm ending it there because this whole 2-day debacle turned up 0 results.
Because of course it did.
Yes.
Because it's Stewart fucking
Northcott. When I told you the first time that they stopped and like they dug a little bit and then they like got back in the car, drove a little ways, and then they got out again, dug a little bit, they walked around, they dug a little bit more, and then Stewart's like, oh, it's under a bunch of rocks somewhere. And they're like, how many rocks? And he's like, well, you'll know when you see it. Like, dumb. This whole thing, a waste of time, manpower, and money. It was an absolute fiasco of biblical proportions. Again, this is a 2-day just search in the desert because of this fucking pathological liar.
In their fucking car with a murderer and rapist.
Yep. So, because of how many and how elusive, for lack of a better word, his claims were, the police were still looking and digging for bodies even after he was dead. So while in prison, he was still sending police out because it was a game.
Right.
To him.
Right.
So
and they continued to do it.
Yep. So when they got back to LA, he insisted that he was forced to sign the confession.
Ugh.
And I can only imagine that his LA lawyer was exhausted.
He wasn't forced to do shit. No. Honestly, he forced them to do all the things.
Yep. Uh-huh.
This was the one instance where the LAPD didn't force.
They just went along with whatever he said. That's what it was. So
I'm laughing because I'm pissed.
Yes. So he changed his minds a million times to like plead guilty, to plead not guilty, lots of back and forth.
Of course.
Like I said, a lot of bullshit later, and everything was decided that all charges would be in Riverside County, not Los Angeles County. But the charge for Walter Collins would wait until Louise was officially extradited, and the sodomy charge ended up being thrown out. So Louise got to Riverside County on December 8th. So, fun fact, Stewart did fall ill of, I think he had a cold or some shit, I don't know. And he was visited in the hospital by Christine Collins. There is a picture of him sitting next to her that we'll go ahead and post for that because it's worth looking at.
Yeah, I refrained from posting that when I for the Changelings episode.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because that was from me.
I know.
So, on December 12th, Stewart and Louise were reunited in court to be arraigned together for the murder of Walter Collins. Now, Stewart's lawyer, who also represented Louise, wanted him to plead not guilty by reason of insanity, but he refused.
Well, no, of course.
And Louise also pled not guilty. So this is where they would be like decided, like, okay, how's the trial gonna go? This is kind of like a pre-trial type thing. Now, in the meantime, Louise was making a lot of claims that Stewart was the product of incest between Winifred and George. He said that, she said that, like, Stewart was the product of her having relations with some English lord. That Stewart's birth certificate was in England, actually. And I don't...
She's a lot.
Yeah. So I think there was a reason for every outlandish tale, and that was basically just to get Stewart off the hook. That's the only thing that Louise cared about, is to make sure that Stewart wasn't sentenced. So
yeah, right.
She even admitted and confessed to all the murders at one point. She was like, no, I did all of them. And Earl Redwine even was like, Ms. Northcott, you are not telling me the truth right now. Like, come on. So, because she called to them while she was in jail. She actually like made appointment, like called to them and was like, I need to have a meeting with you, all of you lawyers, because I need to confess.
You lawyers.
Yeah, you lawyers, you. She did confess to all the murders once and try and free Stewart, and a stenographer recorded the whole confession.
I can't even imagine being that stenographer.
Yeah. So during this first meeting, she implicated her, George, and Sanford, but claimed that Stewart had nothing to do with any of the murders.
Oh my gosh.
Redwine was unimpressed.
Of course.
So this was one day, and then the next day she wanted to confess again to something else. Redwine was like, I'm not going to fucking meet with you again. You just write it down and you send it to me, and then we'll go from there.
Right.
So that's what she did. So in writing, she confessed to Walter Collins' murder.
Okay.
So the next day, after Louise wrote down this confession that she's the one that killed Walter Collins, the next day they hurried up and put a trial together for her.
Holy shit.
Because they're like, you know, we got a confession, we're doing this right fucking now, kind of thing.
Wow.
And so Louise was in court for the murder of Walter Collins on December 31st. It had been convened so quickly that there was hardly any people there. And it was pretty much a bench trial because there was obviously no time to get a jury.
Right.
So it was the judge. So she testified, Sanford testified, Redwine testified, Sheriff Sweeters testified. Louise' extradition lawyer, who was a Canadian barrister, arrived that morning to represent her, and she dismissed him because she wanted to just plead guilty. No fancy
trial
stuff
at all?
She just wanted to plead guilty, is what she wanted. She wanted nothing. She just wanted to confess and be sent to prison.
Wow.
Yeah. So Judge Morton is the one who sentenced her to life in prison, and he told her, because you're a woman, I'm not going to sentence you to hang.
Ugh.
Which I'm like, don't show her fucking mercy for that.
Hang her.
Yeah.
Hang her.
So, yeah. So she was sent to San Quentin. At the time, they did have a women's section of that prison.
Right.
Because now it's just men. But on the ferry ride to San Quentin, so Sheriff Sweeters and his wife were the people that escorted her to San Quentin. And his wife does show up another time, which I'm like, why are you bringing your wife into this? What are you doing?
Interesting.
But whatever. So on the ferry ride, Louise read an article where Stewart said some not nice things about her because he doesn't care about
anybody except himself.
Right. So she read that, and I guess Sheriff Sweeter's wife was like, oh, don't read that, trying to not get her to read that, and she read it. So once she got to San Quentin, she retracted her confession.
Well, of course.
That's when she contracted. Right. She gave a different story, but she did admit there that she confessed to try and get Stewart's charges dropped. She did admit that once she got there, but it's like, well, you already been sentenced.
So I mean,
so Stewart's Riverside County trial began before Judge Morton on January 2nd, 1929. Redwine and Kelly, who I had mentioned before, represented the state of California. And at first, I'm going to put that heavily, at first, Sanford had 4 lawyers. Not Sanford. Stewart, I'm sorry, I get mixed up on occasion, had 4 lawyers representing him. Save, I'm really sorry, or Save, these names are going to be really, Tremadon, I'm really sorry, Sokol, and Cameron for Stewart.
Okay.
But the only name that I'm really going to say a lot is Save because he's the main one. But these were like all, they had to do with his extradition and blah, blah, blah. So right away, so the trial was supposed to begin the 2nd. So right away, Save, again, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but I'm really sorry. He called for a motion to get a new judge.
Because was that the same judge that sentenced Louise?
Yes. So he right away motioned for a new judge and saying something about how, like,
honestly, any good lawyer would, though.
Yeah. And he was doing his part to try and do his job the best way he could for Stewart.
Which is why I could not be an attorney.
Same. Because I would be like, you are a garbage creature. Fuck you.
No questions, Your Honor.
Right.
Any rebuttal? No questions, Your Honor.
Absolutely not. So, again, right away he called for a new judge because he said that, like, supposedly Stewart and this Judge Morton got into an altercation earlier sometime, and then he's like, oh, well, you're probably biased. You also sentenced Louise.
Was he the same judge that took him to his
No.
Okay.
That was a different judge.
Okay. Don't get that judge either.
No. But he also did testify, that judge.
Good.
So they did grant the motion, and then they got the Honorable G.R. Freeman. So Judge Freeman. So then Save, I'm so sorry. I'm just going to say Save, made a motion to change the plea from not guilty to a plea of not guilty and not guilty by reason of insanity. There were a lot of discussions as to why he wanted to do this. He brought forth, he's like, well, he's been examined by like 6 psychiatrists and they all said that he was totally fucked. You know, that sort of thing. But Freeman denied this motion. And then Save made a motion to have a hearing to determine Stewart's mental status.
His fitness to be able to stand a trial.
Yeah. But it was also denied.
Oh.
So he was like, no. Stop that. So, also in the midst of all these different motions, so the trial hasn't actually really started yet. They're just making a bunch of motions and preparing, whatever. A guy showed up at the courthouse with a gun.
Oh, shit.
They arrested him, like, right away. So a little bit of drama outside the courtroom. But he was just
and I bet Stewart loved that.
Yeah. I think the guy actually, like, showed up. I don't remember what he said off the top of my head, but he was like, is that Northcott guy here? And he had a gun under his coat, and they were like,
crap.
So you're going to jail? But yeah. And again, I need to repeat myself. While this was going on, officers were continuing to go out and look for bodies that Stewart said that he buried in random places. He would draw little maps for him. All this time. So
because he was never forced to do anything. He forced them to do things. In a strange turn of events.
He didn't even force them to do anything. It's just he said something and they were like, well, that must be true. Like, what?
Yeah, no.
So an all-male jury was chosen.
Well,
because of course. And it was January 10th, which I thought very strange that they chose a jury like in the midst of, it should have started on the 2nd, but then of course, I don't really know how court proceedings go. I'm not an expert in that in any way, but they chose the jury. So they have the jury now. So they were able to make opening statements, and Redwine did announce that they were going for the death penalty, but then they were like, omit that from, you weren't supposed to know that just yet. You know,
that's what they do.
Yeah.
They say something and then they're like, nope. Just because they said it, you have that part, you have to admit. But that plants it into the juror's head.
Yes. Now, I do need to mention, and I forgot to mention it earlier, when they were searching all the different places, they searched the ranch, they searched all the places where they used to live, and they also searched George and Louise's home because, of course, Louise is also implicated in all this.
Right.
They did find a .22 rifle.
Right.
At their house. Now, they did have a ballistics expert to testify, and he claimed that the bullet that was recovered from the headless Mexican was fired from the .22 that they recovered at George and Louise's home.
Oh.
So Savay was still, when the trial first started, he was still trying to prove, like, basically, his one defense was to try and prove that Stewart was insane. Because how else do you defend this man? There's no other defense. No. So it's like, so this one little ace in my pocket that I got is I can just prove that he's fucking crazy, and maybe I can just get him off the death penalty. That sort of thing.
That's going to be his best bet.
Exactly.
Basically just to not sentence him to death.
Exactly. I mean, that's any lawyer. If someone is faced with a death penalty, your lawyer's job, basically, especially if there's overwhelming evidence, is just to try and get you off death row.
Right.
Because he was still trying to prove that Stewart was insane. He was evaluated by a couple psychiatrists, and they found him sane and mentally responsible for his acts at the present time. Because he's not insane, he's just
a monster.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean insane.
Correct.
So Stewart loved the limelight.
Of course he did.
And loved to make spectacles during court. Like, he would laugh, and sometimes he would stand up and yell,
Because of course he did.
So then Sanford took the stand. Because they had, witnesses, Sanford. They considered Sanford like an all-day witness. And I'm pretty sure that he was on the stand for like a couple days. Sanford was one of the prosecution's witness. So they started with him, questioning him with the prosecution. They let him tell his story. And once it was time for the defense to question him, Stewart wanted to be the one to cross-examine him.
Don't tell me they let him do that.
So
don't you fucking tell me that they let Stewart Northcott question this poor boy.
So since Sanford was technically going to be an all-day witness, they had him step down so they can discuss that further. So they went to the next witness, and Sanford was scheduled back the next morning. So his testimony was temporarily excused for the day, so they continued on the next witness and continued the questioning. So the rest of the witnesses testify. So the next day, Stewart, his lawyers, and the judge meet in the morning without the jury to discuss Stewart cross-examining Sanford. He requested to cross-examine Sanford, Jessie, and George.
Of course he did.
Because they were his family, and he knew that he could manipulate them. Yes. So Stewart's lawyers and the judge came to an agreement that if Stewart wanted to cross-examine Sanford, then from that moment on, Stewart would be taking control of his own legal team, and his lawyers would drop themselves from the trial. So they're like, okay, so if you want to cross-examine him, you are your defense team. We are no longer a part of this trial. And the judge was like, look, if this is what you want to do, you are more than I'm telling you right now, I don't think this is a good idea. But he was like, it is the court's job to give you a lawyer if you cannot afford it.
Right.
If this is what you want to do, there's no stopping you, because technically you're still innocent until proven guilty. So ultimately the decision was Stewart's, and he decided to represent himself going forward.
Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh! And they fucking let him.
They let him. So Cameron and Savay was the main lawyer. So they requested the judge if it would be okay for them to stick around in the audience and watch. And the judge was like, sure.
Yeah, sure.
So they gave Stewart a little bit of time the rest of the morning to gather paperwork from his lawyers and prep for his trial. Yeah. And
if I was his attorneys, I would just throw him the shit and say, good fucking luck.
Yeah. But this is what he wanted. He was in power again. So
every little, what he wanted.
Yeah, every little bit of control and power that he had stripped away from him. Ooh, I have that back now. I have something at least. So 2:00 rolls around. Court's back in session. Stewart starts to cross-examine Sanford.
Oh my gosh.
So his line of questioning, he went from one topic to another.
Of course.
So remember that statement that I made earlier about he was like kaleidoscopic leaps from one subject? That's how he was questioning Sanford. And the way that he would question was very condescending. Like,
of course he was.
He was like
condescending.
I'm sick still, okay? So the way he was doing it was so so irritating. I hated reading it, actually. But he would be like, so what is my relationship with you? Sanford would be like, you're my uncle. I'm your uncle? Yes. Are you sure? Yes. And you know this to your knowledge? And be like, yes. Like, I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but his line of questioning was like that.
And just wasting time, basically, too.
Yeah. It was prolonging.
Yeah.
Everything. So thankfully, Sanford was not able to be bullied, and he wasn't scared.
Oh, good.
So thank goodness.
Good.
In this, there was one particular line of questioning. Again, this book that I read, it's called Nothing is Strange with You. And in one of the line of questioning, that when Stewart was questioning Sanford, he had said something. He had asked a question, and then Sanford answered him, and he goes, well, don't you think that's rather strange? And Sanford replied back with him, well, nothing is strange with you. Hence the title of the book.
I don't know why, but that made me want to... Hold on, let me try to put into words what I'm trying to say. Like, made a tear almost go to my eye.
I know, your eyes are watery now.
Oh my goodness.
I know. So... questioning continues. So the court is adjourned at the end of the day, and because of how completely just everywhere his questions were at first,
right,
there was a meeting at the end of the day that was like, you are not allowed to question a witness unless it is relevant to this case. Because he would even like question Sanford about like the incubation period of chicken eggs.
Oh, Jesus.
Like, just, were you good in school? Do you like to read a lot? Just like, what? So the next day...
Because clearly he doesn't know what he's doing because
he's not a fucking lawyer.
Right.
Yeah. So Stewart continued to question Sanford the next day when court reconvened. He asked him a ton of questions. And when he finally realized that Sanford was not going to be giving in to his bullshit... he kind of gave up. So he was like, I'm done with my line of questioning. So the trial continued, and obviously Stewart isn't a lawyer, so he actually didn't help his case.
Right. I'm shocked at that.
Yeah, I mean, he was intelligent to a point, and he was a quick learner, but again, he's not a fucking lawyer.
Right.
So anyone out there who is, for any reason, in a trial, get a fucking lawyer.
And if you can't afford one, they will appoint one for you.
Yes. There was a few times when he actually got trial like postponed because like he was like, oh, I'm sick. I have a cold. And then the next day he was like, well, I have a temperature. And then a doctor examined him. They were like, oh, he actually has laryngitis. So then it was like postponed like 2 days. It's whatever. So... Winifred was a witness. So I mentioned this in the first episode. She was technically a witness, but because of her aiding Stewart and Louise, I don't exactly know how it went, but she wasn't allowed re-entry into the U.S. So she wasn't actually technically allowed to be at the trial, even though she was a witness.
Interesting.
So she did wire a lengthy... They wrote down like a lengthy list of questions... And they sent it to her, and she wired her answers, which is how Stewart was able to read all of Winifred's testimony.
Interesting.
But it was later thrown out. But
nowadays, they do it over Zoom.
Right.
Or just record the deposition.
Right. So
and play it in court.
Oh, technology. So, January 25th, Redwine called his witnesses and he was like, all right, the state will rest. So that's on the 25th.
Okay.
So after that, there was a day trip to the ranch and where the court looked at all the evidence. You know, they took the jurors out there because sometimes trials do that.
Mm-hmm.
So after the state rested, Stewart continued to try and call witnesses and make motions, and
because he doesn't know what he's doing.
Exactly. And it was mainly like family members, but it was never he was trying to make a defense for himself. He was trying to like his mission was to like get the truth in heavy quotation marks from his family. So he never made a defense for himself. It was never like that. Because he's an idiot. Yeah. Jessie was called to the stand. George was called to the stand. When Jessie was on the stand, he also tried to bully her, but she didn't let that happen.
Because she seems like a badass.
Yeah. I'm like, fucking go, Jessie.
Unlike her mother.
Right. So when George took the stand, it was in quotes that he appeared near a physical collapse. So he was a little bit of a shell of a man at that point.
Oh my.
Which, good. Stewart was also very obnoxious when he was cross-examining them. So January 31st, Louise took the stand because she was also another one that Stewart called and was like, I'm going to call on Mummy.
Mm-hmm.
So she took the stand as a witness for the defense. At one point, there was a break in her questioning where Stewart took the stand and would question himself and then answer himself.
Of course. I was gonna say that, but I...
Yep. And basically, the line of questioning, the way it was going with Louise, it was very much like they got to a point and then he wanted to have a break in hers so he could get on the stand and explain how they were horribly abused by all the lawyers and the police officers while they've been in custody.
Oh, bullshit. He was never abused or done anything to.
Yes.
Or made to do anything.
Paige, I know this.
I want to make sure everybody else knows this. He got to run the shit.
Yes. So he wanted to, say about how abused they were and that he and his mom, their confessions were coerced and they were forced. So he just wanted to make that very clear. So he claimed, while on the stand, Stewart, that George abused Sanford sexually as well. And that George was actually, because there's claims that Winifred and Stewart was a product of that incestuous relationship. And then he also claimed that Sanford was also a product of that incestuous relationship. So Sanford was actually his brother.
Oh my.
So then again, on the stand, he was just like, what he wanted to do on the stand was just tell his version of the story.
And he just wanted to talk.
So then he was like, well, Sanford's technically my brother. Also, Winifred told me to take Sanford. I never kidnapped him. And he did admit to committing sodomy on others, one of them including the little boy that I had mentioned in the first episode, Philip Scott. Did admit to that. And he's like, oh, well, they were my friends. I'm like, you don't do that to your friends.
You don't do that to your friends.
No.
You stupid son of a bitch.
Nope. So, by the way, one of them was a child. Okay? So he gave a long, detailed account of his version of everything. He took the stand several times throughout this process. There were other witnesses called, and then Louise took the stand again to continue her line of questioning, and go fucking figure, she lied about everything. Because why wouldn't she? It's Louise. Shrug. So, because Stewart kept calling witnesses, the prosecution basically was like doing like rebuttal witnesses. So they were like, okay, well now I gotta question this person because Stewart brought them in. And he would call people in that literally had nothing to do with this, because again, he was just prolonging, and they even confronted him about it during the trial, and they're like, you are wasting time and you are bringing people in, but continued to allow it to happen. But who am I? So then,
because Stewart ran the whole thing. Yes.
So then the state rested again. So one of the last people that he tried to get was Mrs. Winslow. He wanted to question her.
My gosh.
Now, luckily this didn't happen, because
it's about damn time they didn't let something happen.
But it wasn't even the court. The court was going to be like, all right, sure, yeah, let's go get her. But Mrs. Winslow was obviously having a really rough time, and it was her doctor that was like, absolutely not. You are not to question her.
Wow.
So then they were like, well, I guess she's not available. Shrug.
Oh my gosh.
So the trial lasted 22 days, which is way fucking longer than it should have. So everyone gave final statements, and then the jury retired to consider their verdict at 5:05. So as they were considering their verdict, there was a dinner break.
Of course there was. Because we gotta have that snack.
Right.
We gotta have lunch and dinner.
Can't go hungry. Who can determine anything on an empty stomach? So at 8:25, court reconvened and gave guilty verdicts on all 3 counts first-degree murder.
When was this? At end of January?
It was actually beginning of February.
Oh, okay.
Because the whole thing really didn't technically
days.
start till January 10th.
Right.
So February 11th was going to be the sentencing hearing.
Okay. So he was guilty on all counts, correct?
Guilty on all counts.
Okay.
So the morning before the sentencing hearing, around 2 a.m., Mr. Winslow, the Winslow boy's father, gathered about 250 men and gathered around the Riverside County Jail to get Stewart.
Oh my gosh.
So the officers, apparently Sheriff Sweeters lived in like an apartment above the jail, which I'm like, how does that work? But who am I?
That's the 20s.
20s, shrug. So he like basically like a bunch of officers came down like in their skivvies, like, what are you doing? Stop. And Mr. Winslow was like, gimme Stewart and nobody has to get hurt kind of thing.
Oh, man.
And because he was like, I'm going to have this man show me where my boys are.
Oh.
Which, heartbreaking.
Oh, my
But it's
gosh.
like, I'm getting very, very much like To Kill a Mockingbird vibes here.
Oh.
And I'm like, oh, no, come on, man.
Oh, no.
I know you've been through a lot, but this isn't the way to go. I would have really rooted for you, but this isn't the way to go.
Oh.
So
yeah, it's one of those things where it's like nervous laugh.
Yeah. So they brought Mr. Winslow in, they talked for a little while, and then eventually everybody dispersed.
Okay, good. I'm glad they didn't do anything to him. I just like, okay, talk him down and then send you on your way.
Like not even like arresting or anything, just like let's sit down and then let go back to your wife, please. So the next morning, when they told Stewart about what happened, because he didn't know, he was asleep. Apparently he went really pale. And he asked to be moved to a different jail. And they said no.
Yeah. The first time they actually didn't do what he wanted to do.
And they were, because he was like, can I be moved to safety? And they were like, no. They're like, you're being sentenced today. So,
oh my gosh.
Judge Freeman sentenced him death by hanging, death by hanging, death by hanging, all 3 counts. And he was taken to San Quentin that night. So, Stewart did make more confessions.
Of course he did.
And denials in prison. Because, yeah, of course he did. There was an appeal, but the lawyer... This is nuts. So, there was an appeal process, of course, with every death row case.
Yep. You have 30 days to appeal.
Mm-hmm. But his lawyer, it got delayed by like months because his lawyer kept getting sick. So at first he had dysentery.
Oh, no.
And then, like, on the way to one of the hearings, he, like, twisted his ankle.
Oh, shit.
Poor guy kept getting hurt.
Oh, no.
So eventually they did meet. And I felt so bad. They met and the postponing stopped and the conviction was upheld. Now, Christine Collins did get a chance to speak with Stewart.
Well, because Stewart requested it
before his execution. Yes, and
he
also requested that Miss Winslow come as well. So he did meet with George and Louise one last time. He played a recording of Song of Songs, like I said in the first episode. And he played like some other music as well. So when he requested to see Miss Winslow and Christine Collins in this meeting, it was Stewart, the two women, the warden at the time, and the assistant to the warden. Mm-hmm. They all met. It was like the night before. So it was like 10 p.m. Mm-hmm. the night before the day of his execution. And like Christine Collins like skipped formalities and was like, "Where's my son?"
Yeah.
You know, that sort of thing. And of course he was being an ass.
Yep.
So he said he did admit the boys are dead, but then he like skirted around and kind of like denied again. It was like real dumb. And of course, Christine Collins held out hope because he never came out and said, "I killed Walter. Walter's dead, blah, blah, blah."
Right.
So because of that, she always held out hope.
Yep.
Till the day she died.
Honestly, I really hope that what happened in the movie is what happened in real life, where she like shoved him up against a wall. You know what? I need that. I need that. So I'm thinking, I want to, hope that that's what happened.
It did.
For my own soul.
Okay. I'm gonna let you think that. So his last meal was chicken and dumplings. But October 2nd, 1930 was the day of his execution. So he tried that morning to fake a suicide by pretending to drink poison. They pumped his stomach and everything. There obviously was no poison. After this, he had 2 soft-boiled eggs and a shot of whiskey. And so they were like prepping him for the gallows. Mm-hmm. And he was very hysterical.
Of course he was.
They said
he was being hanged.
Yeah, they said that because he's throughout this whole thing, Stewart Northcott is a coward.
Uh-huh.
So they said that when they went into Stewart's, because they have you on death row, and then the night before your execution, they put you in another room, which name I don't remember off the top of my head. They said that they went into that room in the morning to get him after a not great night's sleep, and he was very much like just dazed, very nervous, very pale, which good.
Yeah, I bet he was.
So, he made the suicide by poison attempt, and so they start walking him to the gallows, and he asked to be blindfolded, which was the first time ever in San Quentin history that someone was walked to the gallows blindfolded.
And again, they let him.
Yeah.
They still...
This was the one...
Catered to his...
But this was the one almost genuine thing that he's ever said in his life, because as they were making the walk, he like said in like kind of like a soft voice, he was like, "Will it hurt?" And I think it was Redwine that was like, "Well, I've never heard of anybody complaining."
Oh my God.
So, and then like he said in like a hushed voice, he was like, "Can I please have a blindfold?" But before he was blindfolded, he continued making bogus confessions. He made like 2 or 3 more that day, which I'm like, you just don't know when to stop.
No, he doesn't.
Just never. So with the blindfold on, he kept going like, "Oh, please God, please don't doing that sort of thing." So it was said that they gave him a sedative. Now, what the sedative was is unknown. I saw a shot of whiskey and then maybe a narcotic. So don't know. So he pled. There was 140 spectators to witness his execution. They went up there. The ropes were cut or sprang, whatever the language is, at 10:09 a.m. and he was pronounced dead at 10:21 a.m. So he was cremated, and the location of his ashes is not known. Don't know if they were spread. Don't know if they're somewhere in San Quentin. No idea. So in 1931, Wineville changed its name to Miraloma, and that is what it is known today because it got way too much notice from these murders.
I bet.
So Louise was at San Quentin for about 4.5 years. And when the women's section was abolished, she was transferred to the newly erected institution for women at, I'm going to butcher this, Tehachapi? Sorry.
I can guarantee you probably said
Probably
that
wrong, but if you saw the word, you'd probably say the same thing. So I'm really sorry. She was there for about 6.5 years. George relocated to Parsonsburg, Maryland in 1932. He got a small farm, and he continued to petition for Louise's parole.
Ooh.
So,
Ooh.
after 11 years, 10 months, and 5 days being in prison, Louise was paroled on May 30th, 1940.
Oh my gosh.
And went to Maryland to be with George. And naturally, everybody involved was absolutely outraged.
Yes.
There was a telegram to Sanford. Sanford was like, don't fucking let her out.
Yeah.
All the lawyers involved were like, don't let her out. Judge Freeman, not Judge Freeman, or Judge Morton, one of the judges was even like, if you let her out, if she is able to function properly, she is a danger to society, and they still let her out. So she lived on the farm with George until her dying day. George passed away April 8th, 1944, and Louise passed away November 21st, 1944. So they both died in the same year. Bye. So
she should have died in prison.
In prison, absolutely.
She not have died a free woman.
Just like Bill Suff got a life sentence, served like a decade.
Well, he got 77 years, served 10 years.
Basically a life sentence, served a decade, and then was paroled. Yup.
I am so angry.
Uh-huh.
I am so angry.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. She should have never been let out of prison.
No, she should have never seen the light of day.
Nope. So, now they're all dead.
Well, of course, now they're all dead.
Yeah. So, let's go back to Sanford. So, Sanford was sent, after the trial, was sent to a boys' school. It was like a boys' reform something, whatever. And he was basically
in Canada or
in California.
Oh.
He was basically a ward of the state. And then on January 19th of 1931, which was about 2.5 months after Stewart's execution, Sanford was able to be deported back to Canada finally. I'm not sure why it took so long, but I'm sure it was, legal shit. I don't know. So in 1935, he married a woman named June McInnes, I think. Sorry. They were married for 56 years.
Oh.
So they couldn't have children on their own. I'm not sure why. So they ended up adopting a couple boys, Bob and Jerry. Altogether, they had 9 grandchildren at the time of their deaths and 2 great-grandchildren.
Oh, my goodness.
He ended up serving in the Canadian military in World War II. And then worked at the post office until he had a heart attack and was kind of forced to retire in 1971. But he remained very active. He was a part of a lot of groups and everything. Just continued doing awesome stuff.
Oh, good.
So Sanford never really spoke of this ordeal to anybody. I think the only people that he would ever talk to about is maybe his wife and Jessie. He and Jessie remained very close through the years. A relative of his wife's was quoted in the book, and she said, "You couldn't have met a nicer person than Sanford. He was well respected and loved by his family.
Oh.
So Sanford passed away June 20th, 1991, and he
Holy shit, man.
Yeah, he lived a very long life, and he is buried next to his wife, I believe in Saskatoon. I didn't write it down. So he was able to live a long and good life after that.
Good. He deserved it.
So to kind of end this, now the farm. The chicken units and all the farming stuff was torn down, but that house is still standing.
Holy shit. Yep. Seriously?
As far as I know, at 2021, I believe that house is still standing, but it is abandoned and vacant.
Whoa.
Because the last I saw somewhere, I'm not sure how true it is, but I saw that when The Changeling came out, the family that owned the house watched it and then did research and then got the willies and moved out.
Oh, shit.
So, and it's been vacant since, and that's been over 10 years now.
Yeah, because I think it came out 2008-ish.
Something like that.
2009-ish.
So, yeah.
Oh, man.
And that is the Wineville Chicken Coop Murders.
I am so glad we are done with Stewart fucking Northcott.
Yes. And honestly, when I was reading the last bit about Sanford, I was like, thank God that he was able to continue living, and he found a lovely woman, and they adopted kids, and they had many grandkids and great grandkids, and he was able to live a good life after having that ordeal happen to him.
Oh my goodness.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And for the love of God, please read the book. It is, give me 1 second, I have to look it up again because I wrote it down on my phone. The book that I read to do my research of this case it's called Nothing is Strange with You, The Life and Crimes of Gordon Stewart Northcott. It is by James Jeffrey Paul. It is really good. Again, it does take a lot of quotes from everybody, and if you're not really into that sort of thing, maybe this isn't the book for you, but I really enjoyed it because I like hearing things directly from people's mouths. So I really enjoyed the book. It is a hard read. I'm gonna be straight with you. It's a hard read. Sometimes it gets really confusing because of the people involved.
I was gonna say.
So it's a great book. It's a great read. If you want to have your heart ripped out a little bit, read it. There are things that I decided not to share with the podcast, especially because this is a wonderful book and I think you should read it. So, give this gentleman who spent years and years researching this to write this book, give him the credit, look into it. So it's a rough case. Thank you everybody for sticking with me. And I'm really, I am so incredibly sorry that it is 2 weeks late.
And if you've made it to this point, thank you for not leaving when we were talking about the bullshit with the LAPD, what they fucking did.
Their 2-day excursion in the desert.
And sleeping in their car.
Yep.
With a murderer and a rapist.
Yep. 1920 Los Angeles. Yes. So thank you, everybody. Again, I'm so incredibly sorry that this is late. I've been sick. I woke up this morning with a horrible sore throat. So it was like, oh, great. Another week of feeling like crap. Great.
And you have to be the one talking all the time.
I know. So my throat really hurts right now.
Bet it does.
And I just talked for 3 hours. Oh, it hurts. But yes, thank you everybody for sticking with us. And again, I'm really sorry this is so rough, but we're going to be doing a little bit of some lighter stuff in the future just to kind of we like bringing you down and then bringing you back up.
Just to bring you down again.
Yeah. So that's kind of our process now, I guess. So thank you everybody for joining us. And if you would like to keep in contact with us, you can follow us on Facebook at
2K Away.
And you can follow us on Instagram at
2K Away Podcast.
And we have a YouTube channel.
2K Away Podcast.
And if you'd like to contact us, if you'd like to suggest something or just say hello, we have a Gmail.
2kawaypodcast@gmail.com.
Yes. And thank you everybody who continues to listen to us. We really appreciate it. And if you would like a shirt, we can post a picture of the shirt. We have some stickers too, and we got notebooks that are really cool that were designed by our friends.
Notepads, not notebooks.
Eh.
It's not a giant notebook. It is a small notepad.
No, it's a little notepad. They were designed by our friend Adam, who's so talented, and we love him so much. So if you'd like to get one, I mean, we can ship one to you. That's not a problem.
We've already done that a little bit.
We've done that to some people. And if you are one of the people who get a shirt shipped to us, tag us in a post on Facebook or Instagram.
Yeah.
Like, show us your shirt.
We'd love to see it.
And if, like, my shirt, I cut it into pieces. So if you cut your shirt into pieces as well, send it to me. I want to see it because I cut my sleeves up. And I've gotten
look cool.
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of compliments on it. And they're like, "Oh, did you make that?" And I was like, "Well, I mean, I just used scissors." And we had a family member that was like, "Oh, are you gonna do that for other people's?" I was like, "No."
You can do it. Look on Pinterest. Look on YouTube.
I did YouTube.
You can do it yourself.
Right. I can't do this for every shirt.
Customize your own shirt.
Yes, customize your shirt. Send me a picture.
Because we don't have our shit together enough to be able to do everybody.
No.
Let's be real.
No, I've never had my shit together for any reason on any subject. So, thank you all for listening. We really appreciate it. Again, apologies for the late upload. And we will see you all next week.
For sure.
For sure.
Bye.
Bye.